Time now to get some of the latest business news, and as we've been hearing, the US President Donald Trump will be making that opening speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos a little bit later, just hours ahead of the impeachment proceedings beginning in Washington. Well, let's go live now to Davos to join our business editor, Stephen Carroll. Stephen, what are we expecting to hear from Donald Trump as he makes that opening speech?
Well, we don't have very much to go on at this stage, Eve, but if we look back to what we heard from Donald Trump the last time he spoke in Davos 2 years ago, it was a message trying to reassure those business leaders gathered here that his policies wouldn't harm their interests and that he wasn't going to isolate the country in a way that was going to damage their businesses. 2 years on, of course, those business leaders have a much better idea of what Donald Trump's policies are, particularly when it comes to trade, and we can expect the president to point to the new trade deals that have been signed under his administration, the new one with the US, Mexico and Canada replacing NAFTA, and also the Phase 1 deal with China signed only in recent weeks. So those will be some of the issues that we're expecting Donald Trump to focus on during this address. The normality of how things work here at Davos is when you come to speak, you don't just get to make a speech and leave. You also have to answer some questions, even if those are questions that are agreed in advance, and it'll be the World Economic Forum founder, as far as we know, Klaus Schwab, who will be asking him some questions on the stage. So that could be the point in which we hear mention of impeachment. So thought unlikely the president is going to bring it up himself during his speech to business leaders here in Davos. It is, of course, a business event, and that is how we can expect Donald Trump to frame his speech here. The last time around, he came with the message that America first didn't mean America alone. This time around, Donald Trump arriving at a time when a truce appears to have been agreed between the United States and France over their dispute on digital taxation. France angered Washington by implementing a 3% levy on large digital companies with significantly high revenues, a tax that Washington felt was unfair on French companies. So the feeling is that perhaps Donald Trump will be riding some sort of, I suppose, some sort of high that at least that dispute appears to have been calmed somewhat. We're expecting discussions to continue over the digital tax until the end of 2020 now, which lifts the immediate threat of tariffs on French goods, which had been threatened by Washington.
As you mentioned there, of course, Stephen, Davos is primarily a business event. It did kick off this year, though, with some warnings of sluggish economic growth.
Yeah, the first day of Davos always brings us a raft of surveys from various organisations with their prognosis for the year ahead for the global economy. One of them is the International Monetary Fund, one that's very closely watched around the world, and it's predicting, it downgraded its growth forecast to 3.3% for the global economy for 2020. That's better than last year, but last year was the worst year since the financial crisis for global growth, so it's not much of an improvement, and that's fairly in line with the rest of the assessments that we're getting from the various organisations. The consulting firm PwC also publishing its CEO survey, another staple of the first day of Davos. But they're saying that CEOs are their most pessimistic in 8 years about the global economy, and they don't see an improvement in 2020 coming as well. I've been talking about these broader issues of how the economy is being viewed at Davos with Chris Williamson. He's the chief business economist for IHS Markit. Let's take a listen to what he had to say about the outlook for 2020.
Things are going to start getting better, although that's going to leave 2020 overall looking much like 2019 because growth slowed over the course of 2019, but global growth is expected to start accelerating anytime now, really. In fact, things like the PMI surveys, leading indicators of global GDP, they're already at an 8-month high as of December. So it looks like you had an inflection point late last year, around September time, whereby things are starting to pick up. Now, there's a natural coincidence with the easing of trade tensions that's led that. So things are not getting worse, which is good news. But of course, there's every potential for these to flare up again. There's certainly no full-scale resolution here in relation to China, and there's always a possibility of Trump opening up a new front in the trade war with Europe, for example. So that's probably one of the key risks to growth over the coming year, some flare-up of trade tensions again. Although we think with the election year coming up, President Trump will probably rest on his laurels that he's achieved so far and not try to push things further.
Is Brexit going to be as big a concern economically in 2020? Is it going to be a quieter year, do you think?
Yeah, the year will probably still see lots of Brexit news stories. We're leaving, the UK is leaving, but there's a mountain to climb before any sort of trade deal is negotiated, and the timescale for that by the end of the year is really, really challenging. So it's going to be a year where the clock is counting down again, and at that time you're going to see all these levels of uncertainty remain elevated, businesses, consumers and so forth, acting as a drag on the UK and in turn acting as a drag on the euro area.
We've had those growth figures out from China last week, disappointing, 29-year low in annual growth. Do you think that's going to be a trajectory we're going to see more of in the coming years?
We've got a trajectory of further slowing growth, only modestly, so down to about 5.8% in China next year, and then easing further in 2022 to about 5.6%. So a managed slowdown, if you like, as the government faces the challenge of trying to keep a credit bubble, if you like, under control while also providing enough stimulus to keep the economy just on this slow trajectory. But we think they'll be able to do that successfully, so no surprises out of China.
Now, Donald Trump is the main event here in Davos today, but there are several other encounters to watch out for. We've got the Chinese Vice Premier Zhang Heng also speaking here later too. We'll be interested to see how he responds to Donald Trump's speech, especially if there are comments on the trade talks with China. Of course, you've mentioned Greta Thunberg earlier in the bulletin too. The climate activist just finished her first event of the day. She's got a second one at 1 p.m. Lots of people here wondering whether there might be a repeat of the UN General Assembly if Greta Thunberg and Donald Trump might pass each other in the corridor in the same way they did back then in the meeting in New York, whether that might happen again here in Davos. The founder of Huawei is also here speaking this morning. It'll be interesting whether or not there'll be comments that might be related to Donald Trump as well, because of course we know that Chinese company has been one of those targeted by the United States in that broader dispute. The United States accusing Huawei of being a national security risk with its 5G technology. Of course, I mean, it's still a very hot button issue for European countries as well, who are looking to upgrade their telecoms equipment. So plenty more to come from the World Economic Forum throughout the day. We will be carrying Donald Trump's speech live on France 24 as well.
Okay, Stephen, for now, thanks indeed. Stephen Carroll, our business editor, coming to us live there from Davos, Switzerland, where he will be covering that World Economic Forum for us throughout the week.